Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
Welcome back for another episode. This is Frank Agan, founder and president of AmSpirit Business Connections. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for subscribing. As you know, on this podcast, generally it's a lot of me talking about things related to business relationships, professional networking, so on and so forth. But from time to time, I do have guests on, great people, thought leaders, authors, podcasters, people who do a lot in the space having to do with professional relationships. Today, I have on here Chase Hughes. He is a leading behavior expert in the United States and has a number one best-selling author of 2 books on tactical behavior skills. He's the author of the worldwide number one bestseller on advanced persuasion, influence, and behavior profiling. He was referred to as one of the leading expert by Dr. Phil and named in 2020 as the top 40 under 40 CEOs in America, best-selling author of 5 books on human behavior, featured in Entrepreneur Magazine as an Oracle member. How I came into knowing Chase was I was watching a YouTube video where he and 3 other gentlemen with similar abilities, similar superpowers, were dissecting an interview of Prince Andrew related to Jeffrey Epstein. So fascinating to me how they were watching this interview and being able to pick apart what Prince Andrew was saying. They never went out and said, hey, he's lying. They just said, hey, he's just uncomfortable. There's some deceptive behavior. And I just watched the interview and they're just seeing all sorts of little things and picking up on all sorts of little things that, as you know, if you've listened to this podcast, I'm a big fan of talking about how we are humans and we are hardwired based on really our history, our development as humans. And a lot of things that they look at are those sorts of things. We're not trained to do these things. These are just innate with us. So I'm really thankful to have you on the program today, Chase.
Yeah, Frank, thanks for that great intro. I'm really glad to be here.
Well, I guess the first question I have is, how did you get into this? I think everyone wants to be a relief pitcher in the majors or a basketball player or something in high school. And somewhere along the line, you said, hey, I want to do this. 2020, 40 under 40. So you're relatively young for the people who can't see the screen. But what got you into this and what led you down this path?
Yeah, I did really poorly in high school.
Okay.
I barely passed and pretty much dropped out. I did the old test out thing. I joined the Navy when I was 17, turned 18 on a deployment. And I had social anxiety as a younger kid. And that led to my fascination with how can a confident person do whatever the hell they want to. And that led me to just starting to look at behaviors and how behaviors work differently. And then I started researching a little bit into psychology, and I saw these high-powered CEOs that were literally talked into joining a cult. And I think, how can that happen? What kind of influence or persuasion's at work here? And I started reading more and more about psychology and behavior. And I got really, really good at it. And I was just kind of a socially awkward kid. And a friend of mine was killed in the USS Cole bombing. There were only 17 deaths there. But I saw the article that came out right after that. And they attributed some of that to intelligence failures and untrained intelligence operatives that were in the region. So I thought, they've got to have some really good Jason Bourne style training going on. And come to find out, there wasn't. I mean, I've been to these Jason Bourne type, schools, and a lot of it's no better than, hey, look people in the eye, use their name, give them a firm handshake, touch them on the shoulder. And it was just like the worn out stuff from like 1965. And I've dedicated my entire life to trying to figure out on two axes. So one was like, how much could a person be made to do? So from an interrogation perspective, if I got to get intelligence or I got to talk a foreign national into committing treason, I don't have a lot of time to do that. And the second, how much could they be willing to do? The second part, how long would it take? So my goal was to extend how much a person could be talked into in revealing information and to lower that time axis. And ever since then, now I am retired. I just retired 2 years ago, and I train intelligence agencies. I train the Army Psychological Operations Command. I train people all over the country, and I like to describe this as giving people superpowers, because this is stuff that you can use as a parent. You can use it as a psychologist to get faster results from a patient. You can use it in sales. Obviously, it's a lot of our results in life are human based.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I guess, how do you get good at reading somebody? That just must be practice.
I think, yeah, getting reps in definitely makes it easier, because on one hand, like, you might make a change and learn a new piece of information, and that's electrical. So it's just stored in kind of an electrical memory. But the repetition makes neurons actually start touching each other. So now it's a physiological change as you start learning this stuff. And if you have access to a piece of information, I have a book called 6-Minute X-Ray that teaches you how to develop a scarily accurate behavioral profile in 6 minutes of another person. So I think the systems really help, but the repetition is what makes it a physiological change where it's automatic.
Well, in watching the behavioral experts, I think that's what your YouTube panel is called.
The behavior panel.
Yeah, the behavioral panel. What I have surmised, and I just didn't watch the Prince Andrew one. I've watched other ones because they're to me they're comical. I don't mean that laughing at you guys, but just how people squirm and how you can kind of pick things apart. But what I've surmised from watching that is that I pick up on those same things. I just don't know what I'm seeing, right? I mean, because we all have that gut reaction. Right. And I think what you guys are really good at is just kind of taking the subconscious and making it conscious.
Yeah, instead of getting the gut feeling on accident, we're getting the right data on purpose.
Right.
And that's why that stuff is so reliable. If you look at the span of humans on Earth, the ability to speak in languages to each other is brand new for us.
Yeah.
We spent 6 million years using just nonverbal communication. So our ancestors said, okay, that's pretty valuable. I'm going to pass that down to my grandkids. Obviously, that wasn't a conscious choice, but that stuff helped our ancestors survive somehow. So that's the reason babies are born knowing how to smile and frown and cover their genitals or raise their shoulders if they're scared. So all of that nonverbal communication that reveals a person's emotion is right programmed in us. Out of the box, we come with all that software.
Right. Well, I think, relating this all back to business, because this is kind of a business podcast, when we're in these settings, and right now we're recording, it's May 3rd. We're still in COVID lockdown, more or less, and maybe for the next 6 months, who knows? But people are communicating over Zoom. And I joke about Zoom. The only thing I don't know on Zoom is how tall you are. That's really the only thing I don't know. But I, still have a conversation, a face-to-face conversation, and I can read things in your face like I'm at a networking event. But when we get back to networking events, we're going to be running into people. I guess, what are things that we could be looking for, should be looking for to, find whether someone's genuine? I mean, obviously you can go with your gut, but that's not always right. I mean, as Bernie Madoff made a lot of money. Well, he went to prison too, but he made a lot of money convincing a lot of really smart people to part with it. And there was something there. Yeah.
And I mean, the gut can only take you so far. And there's there's a whole lot of FBI statistics that say gut feelings are accurate about 27% of the time, I think is the most recent research. But especially on Zoom, the great thing about having these Zoom meetings is that you may not even know it. You and I are on Zoom right now, even though you're listening to this on audio, but Frank and I are on Zoom. I can have a Post-it note right next to your face with all the topics I want to talk about, all the behaviors I want to look for, and to train my brain to start seeing behavior. That's the one advantage that we have right now. I can have all the notes right there on screen. And we can read behavior over Zoom as well as in person. But I would say one of the biggest things to start looking for is if you're saying something positive, does the person's face reflect that? Do their eyebrows go up? Do they reflect some of the emotions that you're communicating with your words? Do their faces reflect that? So we can see a level of interest and or empathy right away when we start these meetings with people. And one of the coolest things that you can do over Zoom or in person, of course this is universal, is watch how often a person is blinking. So the more often we blink, the more stressed out we are. So blinking high up is associated with stress faster, and the slower your blink rate is, the more likely that is to be around levels of heightened focus and interest. So if you're in a conversation and a person, right as you start talking about a contract or like remodeling your house or something like this, and their blink rate just starts going up, it's time to change the subject. So as a public speaker, I can do that to the entire crowd. The lower the blink rate is, the more I've got their entire attention and focus. So you don't need to watch or count how often it's happening unless you want to. Like, for instance, as we're talking, Frank and I right now, Frank is at a nine blinks per minute. Okay. So the average for humans is around 14, give or take. So like when I was taking my math SATs in high school, my blink rate was probably around 75. It was tremendous. And when you watch a really good movie that has all your focus and interest, your blink rate's usually about a 3 or a 4. And that's a massive difference. We could spot that from across an airport lobby.
Right.
You're sitting there waiting on a flight. You could see it from across a room. So you could see two people talking anywhere and say one person is interested, one is disinterested or stressed based on the conversation. And the key thing is not to just say, oh, the person's blink rate is fast or slow. What we're looking for anytime we're looking at human behavior is change. So if you're a behavior profiler, or if you want to learn this stuff, you're in the business of change detection. So I start a conversation. I'm looking for, is it speeding up or slowing down? I'm looking for changes. And that's going to instantly indicate whether or not a person's interested in what you're saying. So you're doing a contract negotiation or whatever it is in business, especially in networking. That's going to be my indicator. And if you think about it really quick, we don't notice that our blink rates goes up or down because it's just such an unconscious behavior. And that's a good thing about it because we're not really aware of it. So it's a really good in the moment thermometer for how somebody's focus is playing into the conversation.
Interesting. Yeah. I have never thought about that. As you started talking and you said, hey, you can't see Frank. I noticed that you looked up. We're having eye-to-eye contact, but you were referencing somebody who's not visual, and you kind of looked away or looked up. And I don't know what it means, but I just noticed it with respect to what how you conducted yourself.
Right. So I tried to look up into the camera lens to simulate eye contact because I was kind of addressing someone else.
Okay. Right. Yeah. And the more I watch your program on YouTube and then have this conversation, the more I'm starting to be more in tune with how people are conducting themselves and what they're doing. And are they making eye contact? When aren't they making eye contact? How they address certain topics, how they don't address certain topics. And obviously, not trying to be great at it, just be better at understanding. How about posture? Is there advice with respect to posture? I find like when I'm in a setting, if I'm uncomfortable, I'll be crossing my arms. And I try to recognize when I do that and not do it, because I feel like I'm sending a signal. And I don't want to jam my hands in my pocket. I'll put them on my waist, if anything else, and just, I call it a power pose, I guess is what Amy Cuddy would call it. But are there other things with respect to posture?
So let's do it from two ways. I'll talk about your posture and then another person's posture. So when you look at other people, posture plays an important role in whether or not you can approach them, how they're feeling in that moment. And this is another thing. Go to a restaurant tonight or go to an airport. From 100 yards away, you can tell who's leaning forward, who's leaning away in a conversation, and not just whether or not someone's sitting upright, but where are they tilted. And if someone's standing, the highest level of confidence that you could see just with posture is what's called a pelvic tilt. So if you're thrusting your butt cheeks outward, I guess, so you're tilting the top of your pelvis forward. That is the highest degree of confidence. So someone with their pelvis tilted the other way, that indicates a low level of confidence. So that might be one of those networking opportunities where you see somebody doing that and start the conversation by giving them a compliment about something or asking, that's a great jacket. Where did you get that? I really like how that's cut. And for your own posture, try to remember the rule, head over heart, heart over pelvis.
So standing as straight as you possibly can, essentially, is what it's.
Yeah, straight without rigid. Rigid, straight and relaxed. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Interesting. Let's touch on handshakes for a little bit. Now, people are saying we'll never get back to handshaking. I think they're crazy, because we have been shaking hands for eons. What people tend to forget is we had a pandemic in 1918 and things got back to normal. We'll get back to normal. It just might not be this year. But with respect to handshakes, and I've shaken a lot of hands in the last month as we're starting to get out there and appreciate it. It's what are some comments on handshakes? Things we should be looking for in a handshake, or things we should be exhibiting with respect to a handshake.
So I would call attention to Donald Trump's handshake, all politics aside.
Okay.
He tends to grab people and yank them forward, and he'll do that to. I've seen him do it to like 90-year-old people on a stage.
Right.
Yeah, and that's absolutely something we don't want to do. But here's a couple of things. The reason that we do shake hands is this originated from a gesture we did with each other where we would grab forearms to make sure there weren't concealed weapons underneath a sleeve or something. And that just evolved into what it is today. And so with handshakes, there is some research to suggest that the person extending their hand with palm facing downward has a desire, whether conscious or unconscious, has a desire to be more dominant in that situation. And people who will extend their hand at a vertical plane tend to want to view the conversation or the interaction as being equal. And of course, the opposite of that is putting your palm upward when shaking hands, which is my natural way to do it. And I think if you have a tremendous level of confidence in yourself and self-esteem, then that's okay to reach out with your palm upward to shake somebody's hand. And then there's the physical contact part. And I've never seen research to support it, but I've heard every expert say that if you're shaking hands and then reaching out with your left hand and grabbing them on the forearm or on the side of their arm or the bicep, they say the higher that somebody reaches, the more dominant that person is in the conversation, or the more they desire to be. Because some people will read this article on LinkedIn that says like 22 ways to look like an executive, or one of these, which is usually BS advice.
Right.
But they'll read that and then say, oh, I'm going to really exert myself in here. So instead of having confidence, let me just learn these tricks so I can look that way. And that's one of the biggest mistakes that we can do.
So if I'm shaking somebody's hand, reaching out with my left hand, and touching them on the shoulder or something like that, it's kind of a no-no.
I would say it's absolutely fine because it's based on your intention.
Okay.
So I am very caring, very concerned with you, and I'm not posturing is what I would call it. I'm not kind
Right.
of trying to be on top of you, but I'm touching you in a very concerned and Andy Griffith sort of way.
Sure.
I would say you can get away with it because it's all based on intent and how that intent looks on your face.
Interesting. No, I think well, if it were easy, everybody would be doing what you do, right? It's complicated. I'm not saying it's supposed to be complicated, but it is complicated. And these things have just kind of developed over eons and eons.
A lot of that does boil down to confidence and having an internal sense of confidence instead of an external.
Right. Well, I guess you really can't fake it.
It's very hard to fake.
Yeah.
And I think that when people are faking it, their confidence makes other people feel insecure.
Right.
And true confidence is contagious, which means I'm so confident that I make you feel confident. And I think that's the difference.
What about humor? People chuckling. I mean, do you guys touch on that at all, or?
Not a whole lot.
Okay.
Not a whole lot, because humor has never really been shown to be one of the top factors for influence, because there's people who don't joke around at all.
Yeah.
Who can command all kinds of respect and followership, I guess, from other people. But what we typically want to do is level up another person's feeling of number one, focus, openness, and connection. So those three things would probably be priority one. And when it comes down to that confidence, that automatically generates focus. But what I would put above comedy here would be something called novelty. And human beings run on scripts. You and I were speaking about this before we started recording. But we run on these micro programs. Some of them we developed in childhood. I got beat up or bullied. I got my teeth knocked out by another kid at school. And some of them were passed down from our ancestors, saying, like, you need to be very afraid if you're in a public situation, because if you screw up, the tribe will excommunicate you or kill you, and you're not going to be able to pass on your DNA. So like when we have any kind of self-doubt or any kind of panic in these meeting new people or new social environments, that is literally a part of your brain trying to protect you from being thrown off a cliff or eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. So it's really important. That's one of the biggest leaps that we can make, is to understand that's not a conscious, logical thought process. That's an animal brain in there trying desperately to protect us and keep us safe. And knowing that it's there gives you some power over it. And saying, wow, I realize that this is making my heart speed up to try to get me ready to run from a tiger. But I make everybody in a lot of my trainings write this down really big on the top of their paper. Remember this phrase: there are no tigers.
Yeah.
We can say, I'm grateful. Thank you for trying to get me ready for this, but I'm not going to die. I'm going to be okay. There's not any tigers in the room.
That's good. Let's shift gears here real quick. For the audience, just want to let you know, I guess how I decided to reach out to Chase was I was watching one of his interviews, and he had a poster in the background for a novel that he wrote. Well, I didn't know it was a novel at the time. I just saw a poster, and the name it turned out to be a novel. Phrase 7, I believe, was the name of the novel. So I went and got the novel, and it's right up Chase's alley. I won't spoil it, but it deals with this sort of high-level persuasion and influence sort of a thing. Good novel. Read it, but went in the book, and there's his email. I'm like, what the hell? What am I going to lose here? I'm going to reach out and just tell him, hey, having the poster worked. I bought the book, and as I was typing the email, I'm like, you know what? I'd love to have him on the podcast, because I think there's a lot of value, and there certainly has been. So I do want to put a plug out there for your novel, Phrase 7. And then the second one, which I'm working through, The Belgrade Archer. And I think you're working on a third or a fourth.
And they will get a TV series very soon. as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's awesome. Do you know with whom yet, or is that not public?
It's not public yet.
Okay, we'll leave it alone then. Well, that's great. I mean, they are good books. I was going to say it would be wonderful if they were movies, because I'm more a movie type person. I don't like watching series because then they never seem to end right. If it's a limited series, they might, or generally do. But beyond obviously buying your novels, which would be great, watching the programs when they come out, what are some other ways that people watching could help? Types of people you're looking to meet?
I would definitely encourage you to, if you're interested at all in any of this behavior stuff, go on YouTube and subscribe to the Behavior Panel. We were on Dr. Phil just a few weeks ago, and I think we're one of the fastest growing channels on YouTube. We just kind of, all four of us are body language, behavior, influence experts, and we just break down these videos of people, getting on the news and saying, "Well, I don't know where my wife is. I haven't seen her in a couple of days. I don't know, I don't know where. You're not going to find her back there in the yard, I promise."
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. And, it's a really good time. But if you'd like to connect at all, you just Google Chase Hughes or go to chasehughes.com.
Well, I will put that in the show notes, and so people can have access to it. But again, I really appreciate your time here today. This was insightful for me.
You bet. Thanks, Frank. Glad to be here.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AMSPIRIT.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.